Okay, I'm gonna tweet it out.
Cool. We are live. Here is the link.
So what can we do with this Google Hangouts? Can we get calls?
I think I can add people. Yeah.
Okay, so people would like call in, you would just accept them, and then they would just become okay.
I think I can. Well, I sent you the link, so I'll just send them the link, and then I guess like I can eject you, so I could probably eject whoever if they said something stupid.
Yeah, we got to watch out for that.
Yeah.
I guess I don't think we can go back and edit it later.
No, I'm not. I'm not really in the mood to do that.
Okay, I got the link. One sec. You put it in the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah, you did. Okay.
Okay.
I'm just sucking back the coffee. It was a long day. Long
Yeah.
day.
Dude, I can't do coffee at this time. I already drink way too much coffee. I think that also has to do with it. I drink like, say I drank my coffee and I was like, whoa, that was a lot of coffee. And I think I need to scale back.
I know what you mean. I drink coffee in the morning until I just can't stand coffee anymore, and then
Yeah.
I stop. I'm not like a 1 cup, 2 cup guy. I'm like sometimes I'm just like I'm gonna be sick, so I should stop drinking this. You know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and then I work out right before I come to work, so I like drink a shit ton of coffee, and then I'm like, all right, let's go. But lately, I'm just like, oh my god, this is like I'm way too jacked up right now.
Yeah. Are you okay? Do you have a preference? Do you like French press, or do you brew it, or do you like what do
I
you
just drink it black out of the coffee machine.
right out of the pot?
Yeah,
That's good.
I ain't got time for any of that other stuff. I do grind it though. I grind it. I get it fresh, so that's kind of cool. I guess it's a little better.
That is cool. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I'm
So
just still trying to get into Twitter.
okay.
People are. I'm not even in the. Are people in the? We got people.
I think we have a few.
We got people.
Okay, let's see.
This is always the most fun part of the show. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. I'm getting myself. Stop that. We are live. Okay, tweets out.
Cool.
Let's wait till we get a few people in here. Unless you wanna. Yeah. Oh, we got Ren in here. Hey, Ren, how's it going? Minor Man, Apple Goo
Where are you seeing this?
in the chat.
Oh,
Hi, Andy's here. Oh, likes your hat.
okay, thanks.
um, June's here. Jared's here. I'm gonna give it a couple minutes.
Okay.
So what else?
Um, not much.
What'd you do this weekend?
What did I do this weekend? Um, I well, yesterday, I was just talking with a lot of my family members and stuff. They're like, for my birthday. Um, and the day before, I was working on some stuff. Um, yeah, that might be why I'm tired.
Yeah, just personal projects.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we gotta get this thing out, and so there's like a lot of kind of polish in terms of the at least from the contracting side. So I was doing some research, especially yesterday. I was doing some more on terms of like stamps, and I had to rewrite that today. And I'm running into some, well, I mean, not issues, but just it's integration. And so at this point in time, the network is up, and we can push transactions through, but it's not hooked into the new contracting library. So that's kind of the next step. And there's certain things that we need to have um, in terms of like stamps and things like that. So working on that today, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that was nice to see you working on that stuff because I know that's kind of
Oh,
like the outlier type stuff.
yeah. I mean, I kind of do that stuff where it's like, okay, the bulk of it's there, but it needs to be integrated and kind of like buffed out more.
Hmm.
Um, because that is, I guess, a little more nuanced. And then there's certain requirements that, um, in terms of like UX and stuff like that, that I think I probably have an easier time doing than some of the other guys.
Yeah. I definitely don't want to get too much into that right now. There's a question on that type of stuff which I want to hit later.
Mhm.
Okay, what we got here now? 15. Okay, I think we're pretty good to start. Rich is here. Hey, Rich, what's up, buddy? Okay, guys, welcome to Viva la Lamden, episode 3, with Stuart Farmer and myself, Jeff Scott. Um, Thanks for joining us. We're still trying to work this thing out, but we got Google Hangouts working now, so hopefully I'm coming through clear and loud, and I don't sound like I'm underwater.
Oh yeah.
That which is fantastic for me, and I'm sorry you guys had to listen to that. So I want to start with just a little bit of like community updates. Then we're going to jump into some questions. Both Stu and I had long days, and we are both just going to power through this for you guys because we love you. So we're just going to maybe keep this short, get to a bunch of questions, and then kind of say goodbye. So just for the community update, the Telegram room now we have a new rule. There's no price talk, no trade talk, no speculation. We're just trying to keep it professional. And I know that sounds like a line, but it's true. We know we had a lot of complaints over the last couple of weeks, just the way the room's been operating. And I've been meaning to put this down for a while now, and I'm finally doing it. For a while there, we didn't have a whole lot of people to talk about, so I felt like people needed something to talk about, and that was one thing. But now that we're getting closer to RC release, we're just trying to keep it a little more professional. So I don't like banning people. I barely ever do it. But if you keep pressing me, I have to. And Telegram makes it very easy for me to ban people. So I've actually accidentally banned people. So don't give me a reason to. I don't want to do it. So just please be friendly, be courteous. Keep the price speculation stuff just to your trading groups that I know you're all in. I'm sure you have 1,000 of them if you like that kind of thing. So that's all I'll say about that. We got a new logo. I did it in about 3 minutes. I like it, but if you can do better, shoot me one. I'll throw it up. Obviously don't put Pepe on there, but do whatever. If you can come up with something nice, for sure, do it. And RCNet is incoming, so the title isn't a lie. So when for sure 3 weeks. I wanted to give a shout out. I forgot these guys last time we talked, and I wanted to give a shout out to these guys. Twisted Spine, who's part of the Telegram community. I love this guy, and he's actually cutting and editing a lot of the clips for us. So the clips you see circulated on Twitter and on Reddit, he's cutting those out for us, and he's putting it up, and he's doing it all on his own volition, and he's great, and we thank you for doing it. And also Soft Apple Goo, he is doing written transcripts of the podcast, which I don't believe we've got up anywhere. We're going to find a spot for them and we're going to link to them, but it's a hell of a lot of work. And nobody asked him to do it. He just loves doing it. Sometimes people like that are the best kind of people. So really appreciate both you guys for that. Anything else from a community standpoint, Stu, do you have?
No, I'm wondering what soft apple goo means. What is soft apple goo?
Well, I think it's a combination of Microsoft, Apple, and Google.
Oh.
You didn't put that together?
No. Why would I put that together?
I guess not.
It sounds like applesauce or something.
Something you'd step in, right? So, okay. So this week's Stu, you guys are still working on getting the contracting married up with the blockchain or the protocol.
Yeah.
Right. You have had Raghu take the team back to implement some more in-depth testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which they've done. So how's testing going?
Testing's good. And so we'll probably need to do what we're looking at is just more testing in general in terms of like automated unit tests. But for now, we have the network up, so it's processing transactions and minting blocks. And basically, it's now, okay, great, but we need to integrate the new version of contracting, which we thought was good to go. But it wasn't really. I think my cleaner's here. Yeah, but anyways, yeah. So basically, we're just getting the new version of contracting out. There's some things like stamps, which are implemented, but today I spent some time implementing them a little bit more flexibly so that you could set them from Cilantro side, and then if you wanted to add certain operations to add or deduct certain amount of stamps arbitrarily, you could as well. So that's working. And then
so I could, from within the contract itself, manipulate the stamps?
No.
Okay.
No, what I mean is like basically we have all the operations, just like Ethereum has all the opcodes are linked to different gas amounts. So if you like add two numbers together, that's an operation, so that costs a certain amount of gas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So what we don't have is read writes. So if you write a ton of data to state, it's pretty much, it doesn't count how much data that you're passing in. So what we have to do is we have to add a hook right before you either get something out of the state or you put something into the state that calculates how big of a payload that thing is and then deducts that from your stamps. And so arbitrarily what we were doing is just saying, okay, we have a code block, which is a transaction, start tracer, and then run the transaction, then stop tracer, and if it runs out of stamps in between, it blows up. But because we're now doing a little bit of like sort of hijacking around the sets and gets of the driver. It needs to be tuned a little bit differently, so we've been working on that today. So that's good. And then last week I found some security holes and patched those things up. So, you know,
So like stamps, are people going to be required to hold stamps, or do you just have an amount of tau in your wallet and it
yeah,
does a conversion and then subtracts the tau?
yeah, that's
Yeah,
it. The latter,
yeah.
what that is true. And so
How
it's
does how does that compare to Ethereum exactly? Like, do they have do they have gas, or is gas just a number for them, a number of Ethereum,
yeah,
a low number?
Ethereum. This is a number of Ethereum.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so the difference is that you can set the gas price in Ethereum, but on our chain you cannot. It's a set price. And so that essentially fixes the volatility of it. Um, that's kind of like the stamp to tau ratio thing that I wrote about in the economics blog. And the concept there is that the network itself can kind of scale that as it's needed, and then it can kind of regulate what that ratio is. So if like the price of tau goes up, and this happened with Ethereum, right? When Ethereum's price went up exponentially, the cost to transact also went up exponentially.
Right.
And so what would happen in that situation is then you would create a stamp cost that's lower and lower based on the tau ratio. So like if one ether was worth 1,000 gas and then one ether goes up 10 times, you should be able to buy 10 times as much stamps. But that's not something that Ethereum has, but that's something that we do.
And stamp cost, will it be dynamically set through the network, or was it a vote?
Oh yeah, it's voted upon.
Voted, yeah.
So call that dynamic, I guess. It depends what you mean by dynamic, but like
I
it's,
guess I meant more automatic.
oh no, yeah, no.
No, no. So it's more, it's not proactive by the network to keep that in check. So if let's just say, Lambden's $1,000 in the next hour, right?
Yeah.
That stamp cost is really expensive for the next hour.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think there's really anything you can do
yeah.
to that level of velocity, right? But
Mhm.
hopefully, at least like a day or so. That's sort of like the election thing that the delegates and the master nodes of the network get to vote on certain policies, and that would be one of them. And so, one of the things with RCnet is getting it up and ready so that we can start mocking out some of those things, right? So that's like probably the most important first variable to do. We can also add, like, we have granularity on every single opcode. So like if you wanted for some reason to have the addition opcode to be 10 times as expensive as everything else, you could do that. That gets into like I've probably talked about this before, like how much control do you want master nodes to have? Versus just the hard coded protocol. I think that as long as the rules around the election are keen, then you shouldn't have to worry about it. But if you can imagine like a situation where all the people voting don't even really understand what the potential implications of doing that are, it could turn into like a catastrophic failure of the network. Not on like a technological level, but on like, oh, it's really expensive to do these real like this one sector of transactions, and that's not necessarily balanced, and that could have implications. So the RCnet with all of those sort of stamps and kind of the hijack around the read writes and the database and things like that, it's going to make it really easy for us to start tuning that and testing it out. And then when we get the RCnet out with, because that's going to be essentially community run nodes, then we can essentially have everybody's public key assigned to the initial quorum of delegate or master node, and then they can participate, and then it's pretty easy to see like, okay, is this signed by someone in this group? And hopefully a lot of those paradigms in terms of like what an election looks like on the blockchain kind of come to fruition. But yeah, we'll see. It's exciting.
what does the interface look like for voting? How does voting take place?
Yeah.
Is it through a forum on the internet where you all decide together then, or does someone propose a new configuration and then people vote on that?
Yeah, so it's all through smart contracts, right? So at its core, there is no user interface. It's at a protocol level, just as much as like a transaction doesn't really have a user interface. You push some data onto the system, and then the computers all together operate upon it, right? So similarly, that would be the case with voting. It's just a different type of transaction. So whatever the transaction, however you push transactions, whether that's through the wallet, whether that's through some third party sort of graphic user interface, whether that's through a CLI or a direct REST endpoint, those are all ways to interact with it. So really the logic behind how somebody votes is more or less like, okay, how does an election behave? So you're either in an election or you're not in an election, right? And so we're going to presume that the default state is not in an election. And then we're going to have like some genesis date when this election policy thing has been created. And we'll have an interval. So like every 3 years you can vote on a policy. And then when those 3 years are up, you call an election. And then that election period is obviously a lot shorter. It could be like a week, right? But it phases in between not in an election or in an election. And then there's also like snap elections where you can determine like we want an election now, and you vote on having the election to vote, right? So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do it. The user interface obviously is just there to mimic what the protocol does. But on its surface, what I'm at least envisioning for the first sort of iteration is that for something like opcodes, which are a little more nuanced, you would have to do like a snap election where it's like these things aren't going to change unless the majority of people determine they want to change, and then you vote on how they change. Versus like the stamp thing could probably be pretty regular intervals. It's not nearly as like you want it to occur more often. So it depends on what the policy is and how it's going to affect the network, if that makes sense.
It does, and would a vote need a certain amount of the, I guess, I don't know what it is, whatever it is, the masternodes or the delegates? Would there need to be a certain amount of them to take part in it,
Well,
or it
yeah,
just doesn't happen?
that's part of the design, right?
Yeah.
So, like you can design it like that, and really initially we just have to figure out what the first set of parameters are. So like I said, for the opcodes, we'll probably want that to be highly restricted, where you have like you need 2/3 of the masternodes and the delegates to basically vote yes on a snap election before it even opens up, and then you can even still gate it around a certain time interval, right? And then that would behave that way. But these are smart contracts, which are just code, and you can write whatever code you want. So you say, okay, that's just for the opcodes. For the stamps, that's a potentially daily thing. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Or there's the problem of like, okay, so let's say there's some bad masternodes in there, and let's say the stamp ratio is like every tile gets you 100 stamps, right? So it's pretty cheap, I guess. Like I don't really know what that converts to, but let's say that's everyone's happy with 100 stamps to one tile. Let's say there's some bad masternodes, and then they're like, we want to destroy the network, so we're going to vote all one, right? So that makes it 100 times more expensive. If one tile gets one stamp instead of 100 stamps, you can do 100 less transactions now, for example. That's not good. So how do you prevent against that, right? And so you could also do something where it's more of a binary option, where it's like we're either going to bump it up, like we can bump it up to a maximum of 20% of what it is right now, or lower it to 20% of what it is now. But if you vote any greater or less than that, it just gets clipped to that 20% value. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it to make sure that everything's hunky-dory. But at the end of the day, you just kind of have to think about, like, if I were to destroy this thing, what would I do? And once you go through that exercise and you start poking around, you start to figure it out, and it informs you how to write better smart contracts, I think.
Yeah, I think about it in a participation thing because I know that a lot of people really want to run a master node and
Yeah.
they want to do it for financial purposes, right? And we don't really know the economics of that right now or the ROI.
Mhm.
But I don't think they really want to be a politician in some kind of game. So I don't know how much they really care about maintaining the network and
So that's another thing, right? Like how,
yeah,
because ultimately you want to create a network that um, is somewhat has a somewhat inner competitiveness, so that um, it improves itself over time. Because, like, for example, you have Bitcoin running on super old tech. Everybody's been talking about, like, oh, we need to scale it. Oh, we need to scale it. How do you scale it? I don't know. But if you have that baked into the protocol where you're like, okay, the master node's set, anyone can be a master node, but only those who have the highest, you know, voting like turnout, right? They vote on 90% of issues. They're ranked on the top, right? And so they have a higher weight in terms of the rewards they get than other people. Then you can start to reward good behavior.
yeah, I almost feel like if because it's kind of like any kind of like a presidential election or whatever. 40% of the people only show up
Right.
and if everyone showed up, maybe the results would be different, right? In
Right.
any election, not saying one specific one, but um, I'm just saying that is there a way to say like if you're a master node and you're just not showing up for votes, that then you are just eliminated from the count of
Yeah.
how many votes are needed, right?
Oh,
We like
needed.
yeah, like we get it. You don't want to vote,
Yeah.
then that's now 99 master nodes that we're going to count votes for instead of 100, and you
Yeah.
can start voting again. Your vote's not going to count, but if say
Right.
you vote for the next 5 times, then we'll start counting your vote again. Something around that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, it does. And so it just brings up concepts, right? And then so you're like, okay, so what is an active master node, an active voting master node? This is someone who has voted once in the last 30 days. And then, okay, so if it is, then now you have to have the feature where you keep track of the last person's voting interval and then have some sort of way to query that, redesign the smart contract to essentially keep a roster of those people and kind of pop people to the top as they keep on voting, something like that. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm just saying maybe the master nodes that are more involved in the voting, maybe they get a little more cut of the tip, right?
absolutely, yeah,
I'm just
absolutely.
I'm throwing that out there. I'm not putting that in your mouth. But
No, no, I mean that's the right vein of thought, right? Because everybody wants to just put up a node and not really do much, but in terms of like a decentralized network, you want it to be like the whole point of this stuff is that it can run from a community aspect and there isn't like a central authority guiding it towards the correct answer. So, there's software updates that probably have to occur over time and people have to opt into those. And I think we talked about that as well. But then there's also the aspect of like, how do you motivate people to invest in their infrastructure or to participate in the network, right? I think delegates are much more of an infrastructural play. Although again, I have no idea. Master nodes definitely are a storage heavy play. Um, so you kind of choose your flavor, and then what does it mean in terms of like monetization? If you're like, okay, I want to be rewarded, well, as somebody who wants the network to thrive, ultimately, um, I'm going to choose um, to reward participation in a system that I designed, right? And I think ultimately that's what people want to see, because if you have some sort of competition or some sort of driving force towards a competitive nature of things, it starts to build up. And so you've even seen this with like ASICs with Bitcoin miners, right? ASICs are like millions of dollars to develop new ones, and they've developed them pretty rapidly. And they have special hardware, but that hardware didn't exist. People were driven by economics to do that thing. But whatever that thing is, I think there's like this misconception that it has to be just brute force, mindless crap, right? Like, oh, you just buy more machines and plug them in, just suck more power and just do mindless crap. But that's not true. I mean, that's just because Bitcoin does it. Doesn't mean that it has to be the thing, right? So how can you use that demonstrated force, which Bitcoin has demonstrated does exist, and then tune it towards something that's interesting?
Yeah, I get that. CPU Mechanic had a question earlier he sent to me, but he just wants to know, can you give a list of features RCnet will have?
Sure. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna take a break, and then
Absolutely.
give me like 2 minutes.
Mhm. Is there any questions in the chat that I can answer?
I'll be right back.
How close are we to RCnet? Days, weeks, weeks. B Van Heist. It'll be weeks. Mainly because they're just still testing, and like Stu's just doing a lot of the ancillary things that kind of the outlying things that just need to kind of get buttoned up. Like, so for instance, he was working on some of the stamp mechanics today, and they haven't even really been talking about stamps for the last few months. So now he's just taking a look at that and figuring that out and getting it all working out. So um, lots of testing, lots of buttoning up of things. Yeah, no problem, man. Anything else? I'm gonna take a look up here. Cool. I love dead air. I'm sure this is fantastic. Okay. Do we have any questions anywhere? What do you guys think? What do you like better? Do you like Sunday nights or do you like weekdays? Does anybody have an opinion on that? I know there's a bit of a delay between you hearing me and it coming up on YouTube live.
I'm back, by the way.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just literally trying to fill air.
Sure. Appreciate that.
Yeah, talking to myself. Love Monday morning, says Safer. Well, thanks, buddy. I don't know if we can do Monday mornings.
I know we can do Monday mornings either, but yeah.
Okay.
Are the
Yeah.
features that RCNet has?
Yeah, like a list of features. I don't think you need to get too detailed into it if you want to just rhyme off.
Versus the testnet, is that the actual question? Because I want to make sure that I'm not saying something that's redundant.
What's the flow of nets? Is it RC, then test, and then main?
No. It's test and RC and then main.
Test, then
So,
RC, then main. So Anarchy Net was test?
yes.
Okay.
That's
RC. Okay. So, yeah. So what will RC have? I mean, not what will mainnet have. What will RC have when we release?
versus what we've had already. Is that the
Yeah. Don't. Yeah. Just what will RC have?
yes? Okay.
We assume it'll have transactions.
Yeah, the main things are the new contracting library, which means the stamp system, and then the community run nodes. That's like the main sort of chunk. And so having basically the ability to also, I don't want to overpromise, but some sense of network upgradability has to be solidified in there, so that it's easier essentially to transition over. But I'm not the DevOps guy, so I don't have a whole bunch of details on that. But from my perspective, you are going to have the ability to create smart contracts, and then we're going to be, I don't know, expecting, but we're going to definitely be developing smart contracts and playing with the system and things like that to make sure that everything is hunky-dory. And then, yeah, it should be good given that nothing blows up.
So what about free transactions? Does that make you get into RC?
That will not get into RC. Well, that makes me sound like I don't care about it, but it's more like the stamp thing needs to work regardless, right? It's like that needs to work before free transactions. Like, you don't want to have complete total free transactions. We always wanted to have a proof of work translate into some set of stamps, right? So we need the stamps to work. The stamps need to be robust. Stamp system works pretty well. I haven't been able to bypass it or do anything crazy. I've done a whole bunch of weird recursive things and all that crazy stuff. I haven't been able to.
Would you know at this point what types of transactions might cost? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, uh, so a simple arithmetic will be a couple cents. Like, do you know?
Um, Lordy. So I mean, like that's part of what we're doing with RCNet, right? So how many opcodes are inside of one transaction, and then how many read writes are in one transaction, and then how many stamps does that end up being, and then yeah, there you go. Then you put the stamp ratio. I mean, the entire philosophy is there's some economics around it that probably have to be tuned by the network. We're going to set some parameters, and we'll probably set parameters that are pretty nice for people. So if you're like a few cents, sure, that sounds pretty good. Are we going to do like Neo where it's free transactions? No, we're definitely not going to do that because that's a big security hole. However, that's where the free transactions comes in. And by doing this first, we can start to see, okay, how hard should a proof of work puzzle be? And then if we know how many stamps a proof of work puzzle
Equates to.
into, yeah, then we can start to tie the difficulty of that proof of work puzzle to the number of stamps. So if you wanted to do a more complicated transaction, we could have a dynamic system that allows you to just do a more complicated proof of work.
Yeah, I don't know what people thought. Like for me, like free transactions was literally just taking like the function of like Ethereum or Bitcoin, where you're just sending values around.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm going to send you five, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or I'm going to send my own tokens from one wallet to another. That,
Right.
that's a free transaction, right? Now
Right.
running, and I know it's hard. It's harder for us because everything's a smart contract, right? So how do you determine that?
Oh,
But
sure.
I was under the impression when I first read it that
Mm.
that at least that would be free, and then anything on top of that, I feel like would be a bonus. Let's be honest.
Yeah. I guess I like dynamic systems that you can just
Yeah,
define it once and then it's defined for every single use case. So
yeah,
that's why I'm like, okay, we want stamps, so then we can figure out how many stamps are in one transaction. And that depends on the opcode costs, right? If we change one of those opcodes, then it changes completely. Well, I don't know about completely, but definitely changes to a few. So if we said like the addition opcode is 10 times more expensive, well, when you add to someone's balance, that's going to be a little more expensive. So your old proof of work system's not going to work. So if we just had this like single rule that was like, oh yeah, a transaction is this rigidly defined thing and it's free, then if you start to change things, it's hard to go back and then be like, oh wait, and now we need to change this use case. It's easier just to describe a dynamic function, and then you're like, okay, it works in all use cases. And then if the network mutates, then it kind of follows it, and that's fine, you know?
yeah, yeah, for sure. I
So
get that.
yeah. So it's not like bonus. It's more like a transaction is probably going to be pretty cheap to do, and if you're good at um, developing transactions that are efficient, you could probably have proofs pay for those transactions. Of course, it depends. I don't think something like storing a lot of data or definitely not submitting the smart contract in general, like the first place, because that's a big write operation. I don't think you're going to be able to necessarily get away with doing a proof. But for other small things that are small and atomic and maybe changing one or two values or incrementing them, decrementing them, that stuff should be pretty cheap to compute.
Yeah, when you're describing it like from like on the code level, it's hard to differentiate. Was what you're saying. You like it to be dynamic. I'm just talking from an overarching. When I'm looking in at it,
Right.
I think I know if I'm going to submit a smart contract to the network, I should be paying for that. Like that
Yeah.
just seems reasonable,
Yeah.
right?
That seems
And
reasonable. Yeah.
yeah, and or yeah, if I'm writing large amounts of data to these tables in my smart contract, you know, it's probably going to cost some money as well. But it's just sending. I think everyone kind of assumes if you're going to send some tiny stuff around that maybe we can provide that to be free with a little proof of work, right? That's the general idea.
Yes, that's the
Yeah,
general idea.
yeah,
It's a lot easier from a programmer's standpoint to say, okay, it's all defined under one rule that scales. So then you're not explicitly defining how much is a lot of data, right? So,
right.
I mean,
I don't think we're going to have like 5 minute proof of works going on where you leave your computer and go grab a coffee and come back, and then you got
maybe
a free transaction. Well, I don't know.
you could.
Guess
Um,
you could,
yeah,
but yeah, I don't know like if that's fair necessarily either.
I don't know if that's fair either, but that gets into like the proof of work system, which
It
is,
is mainly a spam prevention
yeah,
to prevent actually spamming a network by sending small transactions around.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's just that like if you think about like computers are pretty cheap when it comes to computational work, and it's demonstrated that proof of work is really expensive and it's overkill when it comes to spam. There's definitely a balance between like absolute free for all and proof of work system that should be able to be found. I don't know what it is, but it should be found. Um, Knowing that, you feel a little bit more comfortable with the concept of having free transactions, but again, it just depends. Um,
is Jeff Bezos going to shut our proof of work system down?
why? Because people are using from the patent thing.
Like, so they just want to. They were granted a patent for
Yeah,
using various techniques to build proof of work cryptographic systems, and they define it so generically, right?
right.
So generically, and I like the article I was reading says that the patent outlines how Merkle trees can be generated as a solution of proof of work challenge. The
Yeah,
patent also mentions cryptographic key, digital signature,
right.
public signing key, among other concepts related to blockchain, but the patent does not directly discuss blockchain or cryptocurrency. So they're kind of just sliding in these terms, which are ubiquitous, right?
Yeah, it could mean anything, right? And I actually knew someone who traded patents. You'd buy and sell patents for tech companies, and oftentimes it's defensive. So they will just be like, "We're going to just make a proof of work system and then patent it, just so we have a patent. So if somebody potentially infringes upon that, or somebody gets too close to what we're competing upon, we can throw this legal lawsuit and basically be aggressive in that regard."
I don't think that patent holds up in court anyway.
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
You
I
know, you
no.
can patent anything. Well, you can patent anything, really. It's whether it holds up or not.
Yeah, that's true. So like it's all from what I understand, at least from I don't know. Like I would be surprised to think that Amazon is because when you read the article, it makes it sound like they're patenting proof of work systems or something. But I don't think that they have that jurisdiction. Like I I saw a wheel and now I want to patent a wheel. Like, no, you can't do that.
Well, from the article I read, it was pretty cut and dry. It was pretty cut and dry. Um, it was the portion of Bitcoin
Mhm.
um, where the miners basically do the proof of work. They do
Yeah.
the mechanism to secure the network. That's what they're. I don't think it's. How does that differ from, say, like Nano's proof of work, where you're just doing like a puzzle for the
Yeah,
hell of it?
so yeah, this is what I mean. Like basically, you can't patent an algorithm, so that's well.
Silly.
Um, but they're called trapdoor puzzles because they're really hard to compute, but then they're really easy to fall into and prove, right? So it takes a long time to set the trapdoor up, but then it's really easy. Um, Actually, I don't think that's what that. I don't think what the analogy is. I think the analogy for
Hey,
trapdoor.
look, it sounded good to me.
Yeah, I think it actually is like you fall into the trapdoor and can't get out. So it's a one-way function. I'm not exactly sure, but you can look it up on Wikipedia. The point is that these have been around forever. So like, just because Bitcoin uses them doesn't mean that Bitcoin invented them because they didn't invent them. Um, and they've been around for I don't know, early '90s or something. Because Hashcash was the first one that used
Like
proof.
the article suggested, 79.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, been around
Right.
for a while. And because of that, I don't think it holds up in court.
Right.
That's yeah.
Maybe in their specific application, right? And so that's when I think the devil's in the details as to what exactly they're doing. Maybe they have their own crypto system, right? But I think it depends. It's much more specific than the article alludes to.
Right. Absolutely. So I just want to go back to we got off track there, but so RCnet stamps, some governance,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
uh, community nodes,
Community
community
node,
nodes,
node.
contracting.
Yes.
On the contracting, Ben, I'm putting together some kind of a web-based IDE that will allow you to take your Python. So it is our contracts are Python,
Mm-hmm.
and you can use the Python editor to make sure the syntax, your Python syntax, is solid. But
Mm-hmm.
then Lambden's contracting engine puts on um, some decorators and things like that that we need to be able to interpret your code into the blockchain. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one.
So this IDE will allow you to paste your code in and check it against our contracting rules. Not the Python syntax, but the additional things you need to submit a contract, and and then allow you to we're going to put in the function to allow you to then submit it to the network. Now for RCnet, be allowed to put it up onto RCnet, right? And I don't know what the cost of doing that is going to be, and like
Uh, well,
like the RCnet isn't going to have like our mainnet token, right? Like Tau is not going to be the circulated
no,
currency, so I'm assuming you can just go put up whatever you want, right?
to an extent, yeah, you got to get this currency thing. So like we're gonna have to distribute it or have a faucet or something.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what the IDD is. It's going to be very basic, but it'll allow you to at least create some contracts, make sure that they're right, and then submit them to the network. You can also create a local dev server, and you can work your contracts out and then submit them up to the RCnet as well. So I think that answers that question pretty well. Peter HUS on Telegram sent me a bunch of questions, 3 or 4 before the show. So, Stu, can you describe your passion for decentralization and how you see your future involvement with the decentralized Cilantro blockchain versus the enterprise edition blockchain? At
Uh,
what point will you be satisfied just leaving decentralized blockchain to support itself? When do you kick the boat
sure.
out to sea?
Well, I mean, I think once the everything kind of works and there's a clear path for how it should improve over time, I don't like I don't necessarily have a strong desire to remain any more involved than I have to be for the mainnet. It's not like I don't have like any sort of egotistical desire in that regard. I'm not even really like I would rather not run nodes if we didn't have to, but I think that we should just initially and then phase them out because it's a community project. It's a community network. It should be like that. But I just know that there's going to be some snags and some problems that people are going to run into that we'll probably need to patch and work upon. But the community network is, in my opinion, a good platform for people to develop things on. And that's what it should be. The enterprise is very similar, just applied to enterprise applications. So really it has probably more customization, and I've talked about this, more customization around the things that an enterprise would want rather than just a person who's developing on the platform. But I think that the ideal situation is that the thing runs and then I can build stuff on it. Like that's ultimately what I want to do. I don't want to control it. I would rather just kick it off and then let it go. I think that's what I really like automation. So like if the thing can be automated and self-governing in itself, that's pretty cool. And then I can write things on it. That'd be fun. I don't know. Besides that, that's pretty much where I'm at.
Yeah, but you love decentralization. What made you love decentralization so much? What got you into this?
Um,
What do you like about it? Is it
yeah.
just a fun little experiment, or
Well, I'm not someone who's like, I'm no Roger Ver, um, crying over um, 500,000 children. If you've ever seen that video, it's a little too much. Um, I personally think it's really interesting because the ironic part about finance is that it runs on really old systems, and like when you're making something, you generally want to be able to make something that can support what you're doing, like whatever your craft is. So if there's a way to monetize what you're doing very quickly, and it could be community run rather than through a third party, that sounds pretty cool. You know, like that was what I really liked about it. I'm not into the whole ideology. I don't necessarily have a lot of hatred for any particular thing, which I think it's easy to have that, or at least some people have that feeling when they think about Bitcoin and they think about decentralization. I don't necessarily have that because, like, I don't know. I don't think you need to have that, and I'm not. That's not what's interesting to me. I'm more interested in like cool technology, and so it's like, what is the next step in terms of automation? Like, what is the next thing that's going to be automated? And what's the next thing that's going to be liberated? You know, because the internet is one of the most liberating things. Now you can verify pretty much anything, and I don't think people maybe people really realize, but like you before the internet, you could get away with pretty much anything in terms of just completely BSing things and using imperfect information to your advantage. Now it's not so much, right? And it's made just online business and just spurred up a whole bunch of opportunities. Something like that could also be what blockchain does. And I think that's positive and that's cool. I don't think that you should look at technology and have some sort of negative, like you should not be driven by hate into something, which I think that if you're not careful, you can definitely, if you're into like blockchain and the Fed stuff, then you definitely could. I don't think that's necessary. So like to end this ramble,
it's
I
good. Keep going.
yeah, I think it's just it's cool stuff. And like you can kind of tell when stuff is cool. And if you look at the patterns in terms of technology and how it commercializes and how it penetrates a culture, you can kind of see like, oh, this one, if this one works out, it could have a lot of really, really interesting implications. And I kind of want to be a part of those implications because that's a massive opportunity. So that's where my head's at.
I gotcha. Let's see. Question 2 from Peter. Can you give any color? 1 second here. Can you give any color on the team? Any color? Can you give any? Do you have any insight on the team token unlock that will occur later this year? Timing. I guess he's talking about Lamden team wallet. You want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people think like because that will happen, that something then will occur, but really, if you look at the current situation, like I don't know what people expect. Like the team tokens get unlocked and then the market's just flooded with these tokens. Um, I don't think that's going to happen because it's like a pretty. I don't really like to talk about markets, but it's there's a lot better ways one could potentially enrich themselves, let's say. I think that the 2-year date was like the project technically started like August, but I wouldn't. 1 second. I wouldn't really say until December is when I think would be appropriate, around the end of the year. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I think that's all that needs to be said. Do you want to talk at all about Lamden Labs? Um, what's this? I guess is there a status on that?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's kind of the second part, right? So that's like, man, you could do a whole bunch of cool stuff. You could do hackathons, you could do this any prize thing. You just have pools of like these tokens. Be like, once the ecosystem starts to kick off, having this as a tool to incentivize people to just build stuff on it's really cool. And I like the concept of just it's reward based. Um, and if there's some way to get the community involved in that too, that'd be pretty chill. Um, I'm not sure how that works, but it's a little early to be thinking about that, but it's in the back of our minds as we're developing it.
Yeah, is RCnet an opportunity for us to explore that with some developers?
Sure, potentially. I think that again, we really need to just start getting all of the infrastructure up and to get the main network running first. Like I said, it's like a lot of time to be spent on just that I would rather be spending on development at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, this is from Random Rich. I'd like to know something that Lambden could do out of the box that like competition may not be able to do or would have a harder time implementing.
Yeah. Transaction speeds are pretty high. And so you're able to pretty much unlock a big aspect of like, I think, for example, that game I was designing. That's not possible on Ethereum because Ethereum is so slow, right? So you really don't have a very good feedback loop. That's a big thing, just in terms of like the transaction costs are also lower. So therefore, people are able to be more creative because they know that more people are going to have access to those smart contracts.
You can do more app-like things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the language is much easier to understand. Like you're not storing like with Solidity, it's a little closer to, well, it runs on its own virtual machine, and then it's closer to like what people call the metal, where you're butting up against some hard computer science concepts. Whereas the contracting language that we have is not really like that. Like you can store JSON, you can pull JSON out, you can manipulate it. There's not really, you don't have to worry about typing, for example, because Python handles typing for you. So you're just kind of storing data, encoding it, decoding it. It's really easy just to develop stuff. So like just the sheer speed that people can sort of prototype and iterate upon is great. And it's all set up so that like, for example, unit testing on Solidity had to be developed by a third party for what's called Truffle. And that's not the case for us because we've used Python. So you can just use Python's built-in unit test framework to do that. And we've built this client that allows you to do that. So like if you've done Python programming, you can dive into this. And so it's all about access. It's all about ease of use and access, I guess. In terms of what specifically you can do, there's a few tricks that are added in there that make the development like more clever, I guess, because it's still, there are still some aspects that are supposed to feel a little bit like Solidity, so that if you're coming from a Solidity background, you're not completely lost. But if you're coming from a Python background, it doesn't matter either. So for example, if you wanted to add like on a hash, if you wanted to add like, balances, and then it does the brackets stew, right, equals something. If you wanted to add like a sub account to that, you don't really have to do anything except add a comma and then what that sub account is dynamically. And you can add up to 16 of those like dimensions. And it doesn't matter that you initialize the hash just to have one sort of slot, if that makes sense.
I think that's a pretty good answer.
Okay.
We take a couple more, then wrap it up. What do you think?
Good.
Yeah, I think there's a couple quick ones in the room. I'm out of pre-questions, so unless anyone's got something pressing, I think that's good enough. So, are there any plans for the long term, to support other programming languages? I'm assuming he means Darren. You may want to clarify, but I think he means for the contracting language.
Yeah. It's written with Python, so unless that you want to, the way that you would create new programming languages, quote unquote, with contracting is that you would have to have something that parses into Python. So there's a project called Hy, that looks like Lisp, that essentially boils into Python code, and that would be the way that you do it, unfortunately. And the way it's like we're using the Python virtual machine, we're using Python syntax. So we're kind of like that. While we're more flexible in other aspects, we're a little more rigid there. So it's going to be a little harder to necessarily say we support C++. That's never going to happen. It's yeah, it's just a limitation of what we're doing.
I want to say from a front end perspective, the contracting, yeah, probably never going to change, but you know, from the front end perspective, you can use like whatever you want to plug into your smart contract. So to create the user experience, you can do whatever you
Oh yeah, yeah.
want. And from Cypher, will there be an Explorer?
Yeah, eventually, right? And I think again, the RCNet's going to sort of show us what people want out of an Explorer, because I've talked about this, I think. Um, when you're going to a blockchain explorer, you're either going in knowing what you're looking for specifically, or you're just perusing. So there's two types of users. Um, if you're just perusing, just kind of looking at blocks isn't very fun. So like if you go on Etherscan, they're like, check out all the different tokens, right? Like they add those features so you can have, I guess, a little more quote unquote fun while you're doing it. It's going to be interesting because we have smart contracts and we have pretty transparent um, data all across the entire thing. So you could, in theory, look at whatever you want. So that means we could have a little bit more interesting of a user experience. In terms of looking up transactions and stuff like that, yeah, obviously, it'll be as a basic explorer. And if you ever want to look up, like right now we have an API, so you can look up blocks and stuff like that. And it's just going to be a matter of turning that into a front end.
All right, man, we did this thing.
Cool.
I know it was close, but we did it.
Yeah.
I'm glad we did. So, guys, follow us on Twitter at Lamden Tao. Telegram is Lamden Chat, and definitely follow our Lamden News channel. Instagram is lambden.io. Reddit is rlamden, and the blog is blog.lamden.com. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Stu, any last comments?
I don't think so. It was good.
All right, dude.
Cool.
See you
Thanks.
later.
Yep.